Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's Gordon Stone here from the Agri-Business Development Institute, based in Toowoomba, Queensland. This afternoon I'm joined by my co-presenter, Mark McNamee. Mark, how are things?
Yeah, good, thanks, Gordon. It's great to be back on the first webinar for the year. It's exciting to kick things off again.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. And as everybody can see, for those people who are online and those people who are following by phone, our aim with all of our business development programs is creating a high-performing, self-managing, profitable beef and agribusiness. So that's not only in the production sector, but also in the service sector and other people who elsewhere in the value chain. So fundamentally for us, the reason we're running this is because to build this high-performing business, it's quite critical to be able to hand tasks across to people. So in family businesses, sometimes interaction between people is quite frustrating. Other times it's extremely gratifying. So we've entitled this Creating a High-Performing Team and Managing Your People quite right across the people spectrum. So moving across to our second slide, I'd like to remind you this is part of our beef business mentoring program. In addition to that, though, we're also involved in some work in the sheep industry, and in the last few days I've been involved in doing some work with some cotton producers on this very topic. So I'm well aware it's a very topical issue, and likewise Mark has also been doing some work in this area as well, and so we're going to have a bit of an open conversation between the two of us on some of these quite critical issues. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We're very aware that many people are on slow line speeds and things along those lines, and we're aware that a number of people have joined by phone as well as by computer. Those people who are on computer will actually see in their top right hand corner what we call a dashboard. So the dashboard provides the opportunity for those people who are involved who actually want to participate in our questions. And we are going to pose a couple of questions this afternoon to get the discussion going. It's your opportunity to put the questions into that little poll box that you can see there. And Dave will actually be gathering the responses and we'll provide a summary of the responses that come out of it as well to open up the conversation. So let's move on and describe why people are so critical to the whole process. So in the agribusiness development programs that ABDI run, we build it around our 12 pillars of business best practice. So this is not business best practice just for agriculture, it's for any business, anytime, any place. And so the 12 pillars, which I'll run through extremely briefly, you'll see as we go, the areas that we've highlighted are the ones where people are critical. So the vision, it's very critical to have a clear roadmap of where a business is going. And even though this one is not highlighted, many people over the last couple of days have said to me, when I engage my people in the vision of where my business is going, somehow that makes a difference. So that's quite critical. From our perspective, operating in a high-value marketplace, engaging with customers, having a product that is tailored to a customer's needs or connecting with the customer about the product is critical. The third pillar about thinking and acting like a corporate is not so much about a corporate sense, it's more that the CEO or the person who's wearing the CEO hat or the person who's wearing a senior leadership team member has to act in a certain way. And managing people is quite a critical element of that process, which is what we're covering this afternoon. Fundamentally, Pillar 4 is about money. Fundamentally, Pillar 5 is about teams, and we specifically call it teams because the notion that emerges is if we can get our groups of people, whether they be workers, contractors or families, thinking like a high-performing or what we call a dream team, that's the fundamental outcome that we are seeking. If we're getting these teams to work together, a systematic approach and the use of systems that often they're involved in or the systems about managing people are quite critical to this process as well. Which leads us on to Pillar 7 and Pillar 8. These are about legal and business risk areas. And I have to be honest and say, over the last couple of days, as I've spoken to a number of people, I've been aware that there is potential risk if people are not actually, or the senior managers are not managing their people appropriately. And so in this day and age, we have to be particularly careful of the legals and the business risk. Our approach to Pillar 9 succession is that if we're creating that highly profitable, self-managing, saleable business, that is actually one of the outcomes that we're seeking from our succession process. On the other hand, there are many people in family businesses who are looking to hand over to someone else. And if they are, one of the biggest areas of risk, and most particularly one of the biggest areas of opportunity, is have the right people in the right place doing the right thing. And that's our focus for this particular webinar. And when you've got the right people, that's when you can engage with others in the marketplace, which is our value adding and leverage angle. Sales and marketing, we want other people working with us to engage with our marketplace. And this one really should be highlighted because it's about internal communication in the business between ourselves and our team members, and also external communication elsewhere in the marketplace. So I guess by now it would be apparent that just about every one of these 12 pillars has got something to do with people. So our agenda today, therefore, is built around, so I've brought up the agenda slide, is built around the role of the owners and managers in setting up this high-performing business. Because at the end of the day, it's important that somebody takes the initiative. So if we've got a high-performing business, then it's about managing the components of the business, of which people are a critical element. So the next question about the people that we want to cover is what person for what role, and how can we be sure that the right people are in the right role? And then once we've done that, because there's a continuum of acquire the right people, retain the right people, develop the right people, and manage the right people, no matter whether or not it's a family business or a high-performing business built around personnel, it's critical to have the right people in the right place doing the right thing. And the systematic process is quite critical in doing that. And this includes the follow-through process of once we start a system and engage people, there needs to be a system to help us actually manage our personnel throughout the process. We've put at the bottom of this slide the idea of the dream team, and we've put the idea of the end game. So if we're thinking about our aim, the high-performing, self-managing, saleable business, we would hope and expect that there'll be a clear vision, that there'll be a clear end game to which we intend to move this business, which might be simply that the owners can transition out, or simply that the owners can take time off without being worried about everything that goes on behind the scenes. So we've coined the term Dream Team, which I'm sure everyone has heard before, as one of our intentions for this whole process. And this is going to be a work in progress, of course. So if we move to the next slide, which is about owners and management, and also the owners and managers and the management process, it's quite critical to work out where the responsibility lies. And the critical thing about where the responsibility lies is for the owners to set the direction. Many, many times I've heard that unless there's a clear picture of what's going on in the business so that people can sign up to that vision, and if there's a clear way of getting to that end point, that's what often gets a lot of people motivated and keeps them motivated longer term. And so in the last couple of days I've heard a number of people say to me, because I keep my people engaged and give them a quick update about where things are heading to and where we've got to against our plan of attack, that's the thing that often keeps them engaged. Hence we're about arranging the right people. So Mark, would you like to make some comments about this particular slide, particularly maybe drawing on the family business side of it and how we can include the family in the process?
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about alignment between If we were not talking about a family business, we'd be talking about alignment between the management of that business and those who work in the business. When we add the complexity of family relationships into that type of structure, where people have relationships that have to be maintained beyond just the work environment, we do tend to bring in a whole heap of stuff that that the normal workplace doesn't have to deal with. Now you might think, well, okay, therefore it's more likely that it would become much more naturally in that environment that people would be aligned with the vision. Well, in fact, it's been our experience that's exactly the opposite. It's the additional complexities inside those relationships that bring the opportunity for there to be a lack of cohesiveness, a lack of coordination, a lack of structure, which is a big issue, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. Those sorts of things now start to come to play, and they just don't exist and operate and influence in the work environment. Of course, we all know in family businesses, those of us who work in and operate in them, they start to extend beyond just the work environment, and the cost or the impact of that becomes much greater than it might otherwise be in another situation. So in terms of the importance of people and the importance of systems in managing people, I would argue that systems become much more important, vision becomes much more important inside a family organisation than it might do even inside other types of businesses, because there's simply more risk. There's a greater chance for there to be this misalignment. Now, where does the misalignment come? It comes simply through the assumption that we all know what we're doing. Because we're seeing each other at the family barbecue, because we're seeing each other at the football on Saturday, because we're walking past each other, on the way to dinner, we assume that everybody knows what everyone else is doing and that we're all heading in the same direction. In fact, because we're making that assumption, there's actually greater risk of there being miscommunication. We tend to not do the formal meeting. In fact, I was just talking to a producer only about 2 hours ago, and I asked him when was the last time they had a board meeting for their farm, their farming operation, and he did the typical giggle in response, because it's not something that we intuitively do or think necessary. But if I was to ask someone in a corporate farming environment whether they've had regular management or board meetings, they would be replying yes, and they could probably pull the minutes out and talk to me about how they go through making decisions. So in a family environment, a lot of these systems, a lot of these processes that we're going to talk about become even more important because there's just that risk of people getting off track and no one even knowing about it. So yeah, it's a wonderful topic to talk about because it has the potential to make such a big impact inside a family business. So thanks, Gordon.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I'd like to add something to that. I'm also fresh from a discussion with a family about succession. And there are a few rough edges around the succession process, which they acknowledge, which is the reason that ABDI is involved in supporting them through that change process. And everything that Mark has articulated has come up in recent days. And the solution to it is actually exactly as Mark said. We've resolved the importance of that family getting together and having regular board meetings. Not round the kitchen table, not out in the paddock, not in the shed. So the toolbox meeting and the Monday morning operational meeting is actually far different from the strategic meeting, because what that family has resolved to do is to define. They already have a general vision or general direction. What they have resolved to do is to define specifically where they want the business to go, and then they have resolved to break that down into a series of bite-sized chunks which will be dealt with on a monthly basis at the board meeting. And because there's actually 3 generations involved in that family, of which one is now stepping out, it's quite critical for generation 3, which are the younger people, to actually understand what generation 2 has in their sights, so to speak, and for them, generation 3, to contribute, I guess, the youthful enthusiasm and the useful concepts they have while respecting the position that generation 2 is in. So I guess the story that Mark and I have told is actually encapsulates everything that's in this particular slide. It's the notion of having a clear picture of where things are going, having a systematic approach to getting there, openly discussing it, because one of the things that happens at the board meeting and will be put in place for this particular family and that we do on a regular basis is every month we talk not about operations, although that comes into it. Every month we talk about how we're going and whether or not we're actually on track to get where we want to get to for the next 6 months, 12 months or 5 years. And part of that conversation now has turned to, do we have the right people? Are they the right people in the right place doing the right thing? Will they be part of the grand plan for the future? And how can we systematically be sure that everything is going to happen? And then that final point, which is the reward process. And the discussion that we had was the rewards are not just monetary, they're actually self-satisfaction. So let's just continue to move on. We're going to talk more now about Pillar 5. I mean, we've already dealt with that in a degree of detail. But this is one that I want to particularly ask Mark to talk about, because performance and performance management is often the area that frustrates people, and that's come out many, many times in the last couple of days. So the bit that I see is, I guess, that third dash point on that slide, which is what can go right and what can go wrong. Because often when things are going right, we tend to ignore goings on, but when they go wrong, we want action to fix it immediately. So everything else that's on that slide about performance is thinking through how our people fit in the overall plan, how they are actually going to support us in the execution of our organisational strategy, and how they will respond to upsets and opportunities. And then fundamentally the last point there is about financial performance and their contribution to business risk, financial success, and so on. So Mark, would you like to just elaborate on some of those points, particularly thinking maybe about workers and contractors?
Yep. So there's a couple of points to make about this slide. And those that are listening, I want you to write down 2 words. The first word is capability, and the second word is capacity. So when we think about workers and contractors, and also members of the family who are performing a function inside the business, one of the really neat things to do is to actually list what their skills are in terms of their capability, so their ability to do or fulfill a particular role, and also then to do an assessment on their capacity, which is, do they have the resources, the time to be able to execute on the role that we want them to fulfill. So when we think about the people and the skill set that they've got, there's two parts to that. Are they skilled enough to be able to do the job, and what, if they're not, what do we have to give them, help them with to make sure that they can? And then do they actually have the capacity? Are we giving them the time and the resources to be able to execute on that? And it's really interesting, because if you start with the person rather than the role, right, it kind of changes the way you think about how you manage your people. Because what most people do is they sit there and they say, or most managers do, is they sit there and they say, okay, these are the 5 jobs we need to do. And then we say, so I'm going to give this one to him and this one to her and this one to him, and away we go. And what we find is that because people either don't have the capability or the capacity to fulfill that function, then we get stress in the system. It's either stressed by the person fulfilling the function, or you get underperformance, or you get sick days, or you get all that sort of results, or you get stress and missed sick days and lack of performance and missing days because they get to work and they just know they're not going to be able to meet the expectations because they don't have the capacity to be able to fulfill the function. So by starting with the people rather than starting with the jobs, you actually give yourself a better chance of being able to execute or being aligned with what the vision of the business or what we're trying to achieve in making the business run successfully. So just a different way of looking at it. So this is about putting the people into the performance rather than just focusing on the task. Second thing is to talk about this one is what we do in terms of measuring their performance or their contribution. In all businesses that you work in, yep, we can talk about the joy of doing the job, and there is an element, particularly in agriculture, there's an element of that, but it's still running a business, and being able to measure someone's performance by how much they actually contribute to the bottom line is very helpful both to the person who's doing the function, because they actually get a feeling for and a clear understanding of what their contribution is, and also to the business, because you understand whether you've got the right person in the right job, doing it at the right time in the right way. So putting in place some sort of performance measure is a critical aspect in putting the people into the performance of the business. So I'll leave it there, Gordon.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mark. So this is a very important slide, so I just want to recap. The points that Mark has made is thinking about the person to do the job rather than starting with the job and trying to shoehorn a person into that position, which takes us back to the words he mentioned about capability and capacity, which is where we're heading to in this program in a few minutes, where we think of personality types, behavioural styles, and I guess reward systems based around feedback on the extent to which people are contributing towards a clearly defined outcome that they've signed up for. And when we talk about a bit further on, some of the job descriptions, key performance indicators and things like that, it requires a fair bit of thought on behalf of the business owners to consider what specifically the people need to do, because a general comment on the job not being done right, as opposed to specifically articulating what the expectations were and how we've actually been able to meet those expectations, is a critical element of measuring performance and also allowing us to assess that resource utilisation that Mark has talked about. So really this is leading us into the next discussion, which is actually about performance feedback. So just remember, we started a minute ago with a proactive approach, the right person for the right job, doing the right task, with the capability and capacity being aligned, which is an easy thing to say, I know. So we come to this thorny issue, and what I'd like to, I guess, draw your attention to right at the very beginning of this slide is that, and this is particularly on my mind at the moment, is that we are governed by certain rules and regulations, so I've called them the rules, and they tend to very much govern our positioning in the marketplace and also our risk. So if you think back to our 12 pillars of business best practice, we talked very much about legal risk, financial risk, we talked about the vision, we talked about communication. So all of those things are embodied in this whole feedback process. So I guess in order for us to be able to position the job a person has been asked to do or has signed up to do, because that's often the case, they've actually signed up to do it because they've actually, one would hope and expect, signed up to an employment job description of some sort that's actually been clearly articulated, they've been walked through it, and they've said, yes, I can do that, and I'm prepared to do that, and I'm happy to do that. Then they must understand the performance measures. So that means the business owners need to be quite clear about what those performance measures are, and that happens to fit quite well with the idea of the vision it fits quite well with defining our goals of where we want the business to go to, because we want those people to be contributing to those goals. And if we think of higher level people, they're often the ones who are saying, I'm actually interested. I'm personally interested to find out what your objectives are and how I can contribute to those objectives. So once again, Mark, I'm just going to ask you to think this feedback process through, because I know you've been involved in it on a number of occasions, as have I, and certainly very recently. And then we'll have a bit of an open discussion about that as well.
Yeah, one of the to use a specific example, I'm actually in the middle of working with a client who's moving from, you might say, a regular pay types arrangement with their staff where it hasn't been a performance-based relationship, migrating the whole team to one that is not entirely but much more highly impacted on by their performance. So there's some, hate to use jargon, but there's some key performance indicators that the staff have to comply to, and we're transitioning from where if I show up on Monday and finish on Friday, I'm going to get my pay, whereas they've actually got to meet some performance criteria so that they get rewarded for good performance, but when their performance isn't good, it impacts on their REM package. So in the middle of doing that right now. What's interesting about that process is that if you do it in a structured, open, well planned out way, the people that you want working in the business actually respond very positively to that, and are more than happy to move into that type of environment as long as you present or give them the resources they need to do the job. And that comes back to that capability and capacity comment that we were making earlier. But I guess the point 4 is the really important point on this slide, is that you just need to be giving them formal and informal feedback regularly. Again, something that sometimes doesn't happen in family businesses, and it needs to impact on some of the benefits that they get from working on them. There need to be consequences for the actions that people either do or don't do in terms of fulfilling their role. And again, just want to reiterate what Gordon said. There are some rules around this in terms of the Fair Work Act, and you need to make sure that you're compliant with those. So back to you, Gordon.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So adding to that, and I guess summarising the position, as we create a higher performing business, quite often we're looking for the people who are prepared to sign up to be involved in the business development process with us. So I guess from the last few days I've segmented people into unskilled, semi-skilled and sort of managerial types. And so there are a lot of now much more skilled people being sought in the agribusiness sector. And those are the sort of people who are saying, look, I am actually far more interested, I'm certainly interested in coming to work, being financially rewarded and going home. But those kind of people have got that capability and capacity which says, I'm actually interested in how well I'm going, how well this business is going, and how well I'm contributing to the outcomes that you've got. So I guess we've got to think about performance feedback from the point of view of black and white, and also shades of grey. And I'd like to, I guess, make an observation here about, I guess, one particular example that I've had in the cotton industry, where somebody said to me, look, one of my biggest frustrations is that I don't think I've got the right people for the right job, and I've got no idea where to go and find those people. And so we've actually talked through the process in which they can actually find the right people, and it's a much more elaborate process of defining specifically who they are, and then the likelihood of us getting involved into having to administer the rules is much diminished. In fact, I met somebody yesterday who said, I actually had a lot of fuss and bother for some years until I took a much more organised and orderly approach, exactly all the things that Mark was saying, and he said for, I'd say, a good year, I haven't had any personnel problems at all because everyone knows what they're doing and they're settled. Okay, so now let's move on. And we have covered a number of the issues in this slide, which is entitled What's First. So just to recap, we've put the number 1 beside the owners and managers because the owners and managers, it's quite critical for them to think about this definition of where the business is heading. We've talked about the capability and capacity that's required to get them to move the business forward. Then thinking through what specifically do I need my people to do? How can I put that into a job description? How can I put that into some kind of a monitoring process where both parties are happy to be monitored? That's the owners as well as the people on how things are going, which is open communication, and then what systems do we need? So I've also put in here that there are a number of people who just say, look, this is all too hard and I just don't want to do it. On the other hand, as people are thinking about building their business, a number of them say, look, I know I've got to step up and I've got to think about this whole people issue, and that's why I guess many of you are on this, this program with us. And what that means too is it's quite critical for everybody to think about their strengths and weaknesses that they're bringing to the table. So again, some experiences from talking to people just recently. A number of them have said, look, I've actually identified some of my weaknesses as an owner or a manager, and I've actually set out to find people who can do things for me to allow me now to step further up into the business so I can take that business building on. And I guess the final point in that slide is it's effectively up to us as the owners and managers to set this whole process up. So I guess this slide leads us on to the operations, much of which we've started to connect with already. So the second point, which is this next slide, talks about an organisational chart, who does what outcomes are sought, the accountability issues, how to connect with people, and one of the biggest frustrations that some people find is having that regular performance review, because it can be confronting. And once again, I've spoken to a number of people, and we do this ourselves. We actually have to have that regular performance review, and it's much easier if we've actually got the system that allows us to do that. So informal and both formal elements are quite critical, because at the end of the day, if we have some kind of a problem, which is our business risk component, then the formality is quite critical if we have to manage somebody out of the business. So Mark, anything to add to those couple of points?
Well, what actually comes to my mind is that I know you've been involved with some with a client who's had some issues, as you know, because they've had poor organisational structure and therefore poor accountability. Do you want to share with the guys about that experience?
Yeah, I'd like to do that, Mark, because I think that this could strike a chord with a lot of people. So this particular business owner I was speaking with said, I've actually got a mix of people in my business, not a large team, a reasonably small team, but I'm going through an evolutionary process right now because I want to build the business. And he said, I actually thought I had the right people in the job because they look pretty good on paper. But what has actually happened is that some of the leftover people, because we're going through a gradual change process, and this is only a small team, he said the problem is we head off down the paddock in 2 vehicles. So I actually want to oversee some of these quite important tasks that are going on in the business now and out in the paddock. So I've actually assigned responsibilities to key people in the business. So we all get down the paddock, and I, the owner, say to them, okay, so look, you're responsible for this. What is the best course of action to get started on this task? And how are we going to do it today? And he said, my fundamental problem goes like this. The person I thought who had that capability opens his mouth, and what happens is it's apparent to me that he hasn't spent any time thinking about the job that needs to be done today. Then I say, so let's discuss how the job's going to unfold. And then we have a conversation about, well, so what gear do we need, and is all of that in place? and we look in the back of the ute and half the gear is there and the other half of the gear is not. And so this is actually quite a frustration to this particular person. So I guess, Mark, the reason I wanted to elaborate on that point is the question of the right person in the right job doing the right thing.
Yep. And then I guess what I'd be interested to know is how many of the people who are viewing the webinar online, because those that are listening to on the phone won't be able to participate in this, because I think this is a particularly hot topic. So we might run one of our polls now. So David, if you could ask those that are listening online if they could bring up the first poll question and see if we can get a response to who can relate to Gordon's story about people not fulfilling a function that they thought they could fulfill, or not having the right people in the right roles. So Dave, if you could bring that up, that'd be great. So we'll give you, say, 3 or 4 seconds to answer that question, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, so if you can just answer that question in a poll, and we'll just sit tight for a minute. So the question is around clarity around job descriptions for those people who are listening in, and it's also thinking about the role of an organisational chart in this whole process, which is being clear who's responsible for doing what, who works with who, how things fit together, and whether we're clear about the roles and responsibilities of each of the particular jobs. Okay, so where are we up to with?
Thanks, Dave.
Okay, so we'll come back to that at the end. Beg pardon, Mark?
That's fine. That's great.
Okay, let's just move on because we want to get some insights to be able to forward back to people after this, particularly after the exit survey has been run as well. So, Mark, this is just a nice little lead into the question about I guess the solutions to some of these dilemmas. And I guess the point we wanted to make is that ultimately it's about measuring performance, but then at the same time it's actually about looking for the right people in the right job to do the right thing. And so this particular table gives us some insights into some of the drivers that people have, and that includes us as business owners as well. On the left-hand axis, we've got motivation. So are people motivated to do the task that's at hand? Because I guess we all know human nature. If we've got the right people who are motivated, we often get a far better result. And then what we need to add into the equation is their capacity or their ability to do it. And then that gives us some insights into the gaps in our team, and also gives us some insights into how best to manage them. So Mark, could you just walk us through this process as well, looking at the fact that motivation is a key issue throughout?
Thanks, Gordon. Yeah, this is a literal tool, so you can literally do this on a bit of paper with all your team and even your family members. So you can actually sit there and say, okay, this is our chart. I'm going to plot each of my people somewhere on this chart. So you know, I don't want to spend 15 minutes walking you through it, and the chart's available to you later on if you come to one of our programs, or we'll send it to you. It's not a problem to get it to you. But it's a really neat and simple way to gauge where people are in terms of their performance that's aligned or dependent upon A, their motivation, and B, their ability. So, you know, people who have low ability but high motivation, it might just be that coaching and frequent performance feedback is enough to move them over to being you know, high ability, high motivation. For people who have low motivation but high ability, maybe it's the reward system, or it's something to do with team building, or or providing counselling, offer training in terms of skills might be something that will motivate them to move up to a high motivation, high ability. Those in the bottom right-hand side, when you sit there, you probably need to find your happiness somewhere else. But even then, if you think you can work with them, maybe you might want to persevere. But yeah, Gordon, all I really wanted to say was, if you're looking for a simple tool that allows you to gauge where people's performance are right now, this is a very handy tool to use.
Yeah, and you're right, Mark, it creates a very good structure for people to look at and think, well, if I've got the right people doing the right thing, how do I start to give them those kind of rewards, and how do I help manage those other people? Mark, there's probably just one other thing I wanted to cover off here, just extremely briefly, because I know time is marching on. We talk often about the fact that getting a new person is a far, far more expensive person than trying our best to manage a person that we've already got. Could you just make a really quick point on that before we move on?
I mean, the numbers, the research is very clear around this. Acquiring or getting a new person into a role is about 5 to 7 times more expensive than is trying to develop the talent you already have. Now, that's really talking about the people that are either in the bottom left or in the top right. So anything you can do in terms of developing the skill set or the motivation of the people that you've got certainly pays off in the long term. The cost of replacing people or finding new people to fill roles is a major draw in any business, because it distracts from what you really want to be doing, and that is working on and in the business to improve profitability. So yeah, Gordon, that's really sums that up.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And just before we leave this slide, one of the most critical things in all of this is these are a lot of concepts which we're going to start digging down into a bit more detail with over time. So there might be some people listening and going, well, that's all very well, but how do I do it? Well, that's part of our plan of attack from here on in, is to consider some of the how to do it's. So our next slide, we talk, I'm sure many people have heard of Myers-Briggs and a range of these other personality and behavioural style programs. There's one that we use called the Extended DISC Behavioural Style Program. And I'm going to ask once again Mark to elaborate on these points. And as you're listening to some of the points that he makes about the Extended DISC Behavioural Style Program, which is what behaviours people exhibit in the workplace and when they're doing things, it's important to think from your own perspective of where I as a business owner fit, where some of my other family members and other business people fit, and where our people fit in this whole approach. Because when you get a range of behavioural styles packaged up into a team, and if it's the right package, they can be a very, very powerful force. At the same time, it's important to understand that there are some very positive and negative aspects to each of these behavioural styles. And so we're looking to build on the positive aspects of the dominant, influencing, steady and conscientious type people. So Mark, I'll hand over to you, and then we'll come back to that.
Thanks, Gordon. When we put this up, the first point I need to make is that there is no good or bad in this. In fact, all of us have each of those inside our own behaviours or our own personality types. So we've all got a bit of each. The important thing to remember about it is, by understanding which of the DISC styles we lead with, and then also understanding what other people's propensity or personality type is, it allows us to improve our level of communication. So it's kind of just like, sometimes, you know, I've done a lot of work in Southeast Asia, and so when you go to Malaysia, if you can't speak the language, it doesn't matter how much I try or how much the other person tries. If we can't understand each other, it's just not going to work. And often, when it comes to personality types, and particularly different roles and responsibilities, being able to talk a language that's common helps us actually be able to improve in performance. So what we do is we get people to participate in a survey that allows us to allows them to understand what is their dominant personality type and understand their other team members' personality type, and provide that opportunity for them allowed to communicate much more effectively. Sometimes even put people into roles. Some roles are more inclined or better suited to a particular personality type. But yeah, it's just one of those, another influence on being able to improve the performance of our people by understanding what their personality type is and how they relate to people different than themselves. So just it's a wonderful tool, very effective tool, backed by a lot of science and has a lot of credibility, and certainly something that I would be encouraging people to consider as they want to build their people and their teams. Thanks, Gordon.
Yeah, thanks. Mark, just a couple of points I'd like to make. The first is, just to make this real, often the bigger picture people who can think strategy and think over the horizon are the dominant types. So they're the ones who can be multidimensional, think about the bigger picture, and somewhat risk-taking, and are prepared to be challenged. On the other hand, you've got somewhat conscientious and steady people who are the sorts of people that you would actually far prefer to have in the office. Because if you look at the conscientious spot, you've got a number of logical, organised, structured, clearly defined people who far prefer just to get on and do the books or make the systems work. And so the dominant people who are thinking over the horizon and thinking big picture really need to have some of those people behind them in the system who are helping them work in an organised and structured fashion to make their vision become a reality. Many have heard about entrepreneurs who've just got all these great ideas, they can engage, but unless they've got some of these operational people to make things happen, then they're destined for failure. So I guess I just wanted to put that on the table, because this kind of package of a team of a range of different behavioural styles and personality types becomes quite critical, particularly as you're building a business, and it depends very much on the type of business you've got. Mark, we were thinking of another poll question. Yeah, sorry, go on.
I just want to add to that, because I work a lot with this as a tool. This is, if you like, people's natural disposition is listed here. Of course, you can learn skills. Like if you're a dominant personality type, challenging, not detail orientated, you can learn the skill of being steadiness, and a lot of people do. Okay, but it's just the amount of energy that's required to operate in that space is a lot more for that person than if they just wanted to operate as their natural personality style. So it's just a fascinating area of building a very effective team. And you're right, we wanted to do a survey. So at this point in time, in terms of getting an idea on how people might think this might impact on their business performance. So David, if you wanted to bring up that question, we can spend a few minutes on getting that done as well. So the question is poor or miscommunication impacting negatively on key relationships in your business? So we're asking a question about, to what extent is perhaps people not being able to relate to each other, particularly in key roles, how much of that is impacting on the performance of your business, do you think? We'd be interested to know what you're thinking around that.
So we'll give you a few minutes once again to fill that in before we move on.
How about a few seconds, not a few minutes?
Yeah, sure. Mark, while people are just completing that, one note I've kind of made to myself is that there might be people out there who would actually value going through the questionnaire process to do this extended DISC process because it might help them actually think about their team and how to structure it. Is that possible, and what are your thoughts on how we might do it?
Yes, we can certainly arrange that. That would be just a case of contacting ABDI either by phone or email, and it's all done online. It's all done through an online survey. For those that have poor internet connection, it's still possible for us to arrange it online, because it doesn't take a lot of download speed. But yeah, we'd love to hear from anyone who's interested in undertaking that exercise. We can certainly get it done, Gordon, no problems.
Sure. Okay, let's move along, and then we'll get the results of this poll process at the end too. So we come to the bit that I think some people may well have been asking the question about, which is how do we address so some of those marginal people in the bottom right-hand corner of the table a couple of slides ago. So this is the bit where I'm drawing everyone's attention to the element on the bottom of this slide, which is getting the best advice on how to proceed in your circumstances. And I'm letting you know that there is a good website called www.peopleinag.com.au, which actually helps structure some of this material, and it's something that we draw on when we're involved in this sort of process. So at the end of the day, as individual business owners, we often spend a disproportionate amount of time in thinking about those people who are not necessarily performing. And the question that I've posed in terms of that, the italics there, is we have to ask ourselves always, have we acquired the right person in the right place doing the right thing? So are we partly responsible, or is the other person partly responsible? Even though we may, or the employee or the contractor or whatever, but even though we may answer that question in a certain way, there always comes a time where we say, look, this is simply not working. There's an impact on our financial performance. Probably more particularly, there's an impact on our emotional state of well-being. There are areas of frustration, and they need to be addressed. So there is a very structured and orderly process that we need to go through, and it's I guess far more comprehensive than we have time to deal with today. But I would certainly encourage people to think about how best to implement a process like this that's going to be as painless to us as business owners as possible, and yet achieve the right outcome. So Mark, I'm just going to hand over to you briefly again to just run through this, because I'm aware time's marching on too.
That's fine. So the first thing is that you have to have, before you can start measuring someone's performance, they have to know the yardstick by which they're getting measured. So having a defined job description allows you to actually offer a formal statement, a defined performance review, so that you can actually enter into a formal warning process. So that's the second point, which is a performance review, which should be a written, formal procedure. In fact, I'm not a lawyer, so I again want to underscore this by making sure that you check with your proper advisor. But you know, that process can be relatively quick in terms of its execution, but there needs to be a formal process of review. The last point is that once that's underway and it doesn't look like it's going to be resolved in terms of an improved performance, you have to move quickly to a termination process in an orderly and structured way. So if you can think ahead in terms of when you employ someone, always have the processes in place so that you can actually take the people out of the business if their performance is genuinely, and I stress that word, genuinely not up to what expectations are. But if you haven't stepped out the expectations right from the start, it's very hard to move someone out of the business in a legal sense because you just haven't put the groundwork in. So very important part of managing people is having a process to manage marginal people. So I'll leave it there, Gordon.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And once again, I guess I want to draw attention to the fact that one of our pillars was about business risk. And so, again, in the last few days, I've been speaking to a number of growers who find this area of managing people somewhat frustrating. And then on the other hand, I've spoken to other growers who say, I actually understand the area of risk, and so I've actually formalised my processes, and I as a business owner feel far better because I think I'm protected. I think I'm doing it in an orderly fashion. I'm doing the right thing by the people who work for me, because sometimes it's really frustrating if we have to let them go. and as a business owner I feel I've done all that I can and that I feel much better rather than being eaten up inside. So that's, I think, a very important point. So we're moving on towards the very end of the program now, and without having to get to the marginal position or marginal personnel position, it is very critical to give feedback. And so while this is by no means exhaustive, and there are a number of things that we could elaborate on this, there are a number of key points in here about the structure of giving orderly feedback in an organised fashion. So maybe, Mark, I'll ask you to quickly walk us through this, and then we'll draw things to a close.
Yep, so the first bullet point is about where you do it. So if you do it in the boss's office, particularly if you're going to have to give some bad news, that might be the right place, but it also might not be the right place. Certainly walking, down the paddock in a very informal situation where you have to give formal feedback is not going to resonate with the person to the degree that you might want it to. Certainly not in the pub on Friday afternoon, which can happen in our industry. Ask the personnel to rate themselves first. So before you even put a number on their performance, ask them to give you an indication how they think they're going. Encourage participation in the event. You're genuinely interested. Start with praise before moving on to criticism. So you can read through this, but the most important thing in any employer-employee relationship is just that, the relationship. Everything else should be subordinate to maintaining the relationship. So recognise performance and encourage participation in the process. Focus on problem solving, self-explanatory. Focus on results in terms of feedback, not on the person. All right? So that's a simple thing. Stay disciplined in terms of giving feedback on the performance that they do. Again, I want to say minimise criticism, always looking to lift people up, not pull people down. And then as you finish the meeting, this is probably, if not the most important thing, next to the most important thing, is that agree to what needs to happen and needs to be written down, and agree to when we're going to review it again. And like we said previous slides, annual's not good enough. Monthly, bi-monthly reviews really should be a minimum in terms of what we're doing, depending on the role that they're fulfilling. So yeah, just to get through that quickly, Gordon, that's a brief explanation.
Sure. Thanks very much, Mark. Much appreciated. Well, look, we're going to gradually draw this to a close now, so I'd like to recap on the key things that we've dealt with today. The role of the business owner is very critical in this whole process. So taking an orderly and structured approach that is proactive is very critical around managing your people, whether they be staff members, family members, or contractors. It's important for the business owners to take the initiative and take this orderly approach and manage it in an appropriate manner with open communication. In order to do that, it's quite critical for business owners to know where they're taking their business, so they can make sure they've got the right person in the right place doing the right thing at the right time, and their personnel may change over time as the business changes as well. We coined the term the dream team with we did it in an orderly approach, because our objective is as people build a high-performing business, to actually think through how they can have the right people in the right place doing the right thing to free the business owners up to build their business, to take time out, or to go off and do other things that might be important to them, like travel, spend time with their kids, or whatever else it may be. If they're going to do that, then it's quite critical to think about the capability and capacity. Then it's critical to look for the right person with the right personality and behavioural style in the right position. And some may be saying, well, how do I do that with family members? Well, at the same time, it's quite critical to look at the strengths and weaknesses of family members. So this is all a key element of setting things up and then managing things appropriately. So as I draw things to a close, in a couple of minutes, Dave, I'm just going to ask you to make some comments on the poll when we get to the end. Just letting you know that this fits within our agribusiness mentoring programs, which happen in the beef industry, the sheep industry, and are looking to take place in the cotton industry as well, and other sectors, horticulture and so on. So you're involved here in one of the business updates. We run our one-day Agribusiness by Design or Better Beef business workshops. Their purpose is to help people just take that day away from their business, become the outsider looking in, and say, what do I need to do differently with my business to think and act like a CEO? And then as people say, look, I do need some support and assistance to actually build my business, that's where we run our 12-month CEO mentoring programs around those 12 pillars. Most particularly, we bring not only Mark and myself, but a range of other specialists in to talk about the marketplace, managing people, managing succession, and we go through a mentoring process. So every month we do a regular check-in to see how things are going with people building their businesses. So Dave, is there any comment you'd like to make about the poll results before we get to the, or we'll now get to the final slide?
Yeah, sure. So I might just show the poll results because they were quite interesting. We've got the one in relation to poor communication. And so you can see there that 85% of people believe that yes, there is poor or miscommunication occurring within the business, which negatively impacts key relationships. And the other one, so we've had unclear job descriptions or a lack of organisational chart disrupting business productivity. 75% of people have said yes. So they're fairly overwhelming results in both of those polls.
Okay, thanks, Dave. And so there's another thing that will happen when you leave this webinar, which is you'll be asked to give us a bit of feedback. So the purpose of the poll results and the feedback allows us to tailor things in the future to meet people's needs. So I guess there are a few things that have come out of this this program then. The opportunity to get involved in something like that extended disc profiling system, thinking about methods of communication, thinking about organisational charts and thinking about job descriptions, which are really quite critical issues as people are going to build their business. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending today as we're drawing this to a close. There is an opportunity for you to connect with us by email. So you can see on that slide the email address or our web page. You've also got my phone number and Mark's phone number. And these programs are very strongly supported in Queensland by AgForce and the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, and likewise in other states with a number of the departments, MLA and so on. So please don't hesitate to give us a call, send us an email, give us some feedback, because it helps us ensure that these are going to be structured, orderly and beneficial activities that will support you in your business building. So Mark, any last words before we sign off?
No, thank you, Gord. It's been a good hour, and I hope those that are listening have learnt something that would benefit their business. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks, Mark, for your contribution. And as we can see, this is a big issue, and there'll be more coming, so please stand by. So thank you all for participating, and please answer those questions when you leave, if you don't mind, and look forward to talking to you again in a couple of weeks for our next webinar. Thanks, bye for now.